We're on lesson 10. The subject is education. One of the most important ones there is. It's too vast to take up entirely. I've tried to select from many, many things what I thought might work in the time available. A frequent return. Now, you may get tired of considering this, but it should be taken up at every session of every government meeting, every discussion, committee meeting, everything. They should start with the basic fundamental principles because it is essential to our liberty and our free government. And essential means that if you don't do it, you don't get it. All right, the first principle was given by the prophet Joseph Smith when asked how to govern people of many religions and countries and things like that, 30,000 of them. He said, teach them correct principles, they govern themselves. And if everybody understood correct principles, they would have a good start on learning things. And here is one of the most important principles that apply to education. Almost everybody knows that it's wrong to use evil to do wrong. They know that if you go down and rob a bank and go help the poor, you're using a crime to do good. And so everybody knows that if you do that, you're a criminal. Now, there's some people who do the same thing. There are dictators that take over and control the lives of people, and they are not criminals because it's legal. They made it legal. So when crime is made legal, it's no longer crime. All right, we all know that very well. But very few people realize that it is evil to use force to do good. Most of our government programs outside of police and Army, Navy, and protection are to force somebody to pay for somebody else's privileges or blessings. So that needs to be kept in mind. Sincere but mistaken do-gooders are worse than those who strive to destroy us. The criminals and the communists, the people like that, we could take care of them if they did not have the help of sincere, zealous people who really believe that taking money from you to give to their children for public library, park, swimming pool, playground, and everything, that's good. And it's all right to use force to do it. They don't think of it that way. They don't realize that they're taking somebody's money and giving it to somebody else because of the library. Maybe 15% of Mesa people use it. The swimming pools, maybe 10% of them use it. Parks and playgrounds, maybe 30, 40% of them use it. But it forces many persons to pay for what other people want and deprives them of spending that money for what they want to spend it for. Is that a very clear thing? No. The only thing worse than mistaken do-gooders is the rest of us. We are the government. If everybody in the United States, or even 50% of them, would rise up in rebellion against the public schools or this or that, anything, they would be wiped out. They could not resist it. But because we are ignorant and don't care, apathetic, we do not realize the responsibility we bear. Now, if you come out of this course with a heavy load on your shoulder, don't do it. Come out of this course that you're doing the work of the Lord, which is going to triumph eventually. When it will, no matter what we go through, and we are going to go through some very serious times very soon, both in physical disruption, earthquakes, flood, famine, and other things, but also in financial problems and supply problems. So anybody that couldn't get along a year or more without going to the store will wish they had. Satan's technique in the war in heaven was to take care of everybody. A false but fervid solicitude. I'm going to take care of children. I want to sin. I'll save every soul and bring it up. And it won't cost you anything. You just have to do what I tell you. And in order to make sure that you do what I tell you, I will control every thought, word, and action that you do. You say, well, that's impossible. Well, it is not. He comes pretty close to it in many, many ways. And one of the ways is through the false education system. We read in the scripture that all things that are good come from God. That which is evil cometh the devil. That's one of the principles that prevails always, that Satan is present at everything. Wherever you are. Brigham Young said, no man will rise above the efforts of Satan to tempt him as long as he lives. Now you can ensure yourself and strengthen yourself, but the next time you turn around, he's got another way to fool you if he can. Therefore, take heed that ye do not judge that which is good and of God to be of the devil, or that which is evil to be of God. And the Constitution has a tremendous bearing on education. It applies first the separation of powers, that there is no power above the states for education. Any executive or legislative act for education is not in the Constitution. There is no power whatsoever given to them. It is usurpation of power by President or Congress, and is abdication of duty by the Congress to let them get away. President Bush's "No Child Left Behind" is one of the abominations of our day, and he's pushing it very hard, which you'll get into later. Now, when it comes to the judiciary, the only right they have to rule on education is if a question comes up as whether it is a federal power or not. They have no right to rule on what goes on in the states in their education. And you know they don't do that. The United States has been divided into 9 judicial districts. Arizona, Nevada, and California are in District 9, and everything that judge in San Francisco does applies to our lives and to our schools. And he is one of the most radical judges, the head of that court. He's the one that ruled that you cannot have God in school, you cannot have prayer in school, you cannot post the 10 Commandments in a public place, and all these rules, and many other vicious rules. And because our state legislature, our cities don't defy it, you know, say, well, that's unconstitutional. I've sworn to uphold the Constitution. I'm not going to do it. Well, you must do it. Well, enforce it if you can. Where's your Army, Navy, or police force? If the legislature will not provide police force, or the state will not provide police force, the judiciary is powerless to effect it. See how beautiful that is in principle? We've talked about the use of force, and the first thing is, since all power righteously comes from God. Great constitutionalists of England said that any law which conflicts with the law of God or a law of nature is not a law. It is a color of law, a pretense of law. And if we could judge every law as whether it comes within the laws of God and nature, the 10 Commandments, the Golden Rule, you'd have all the judgment you need. All right. God's use of force is to never use force to do good. He will teach inspire and be loving and kind, but never compel the human mind. We sing that song. I wonder if people realize what it means. He gives us agency, the power to make our choices. Then he teaches us the commandments. He commands us so that we have no excuse. We can't say he teaches us and then commands us to do it so we're without excuse. Now, back there you can't read these, but they're just my notes anyway. Then he gives us a witness. The conscience tells us whether it's good or wrong. Now, that may not solve our business problems always, sometimes, and then it would. But any act that's contrary to the laws of God, our conscience will tell us it's right and wrong. And then the only penalty that God inflicts on anybody is to withhold the promised blessings. The church cannot condemn anybody, convict anybody, compel anybody, treat anybody physically in any way. All they can do is remove membership. All right. Now, God delegates to government certain powers to use force. There's a penalty to every wrong action. First, natural consequences. Child falls off a bike and skins his knee. The penalty is he has a skinned knee. I smash my car into a tree, and I suffer the penalty. So there are many things that are not criminal, but they are wrong, and justice cannot be robbed one whit. Every wrong, and Boyd K. Packer said, it can be as light as the weight of a fly on the Brooklyn Bridge, but to keep justice on its rock, not robbed even the whit of one fly. Every wrong must be settled, either by natural consequences or by punishment. And so punishment is inflicted by law, punishment of crime by taking life, liberty, or property. It takes life by the death penalty, execution. That's government can do it. No private person can do that. It takes the power of government, the authority to do it. In liberty, they can put you in jail or prison, or they can put you on probation. Some people don't go to prison, but they are under control. They have to report frequently. They cannot go beyond a certain territory. So their liberty is taken, and their property by fines or confiscation or taxes. So the punishment of crime is legal in the sight of God, where it's done for offenses to bring justice back into line. God gives children or parents the right to use force on children, because children, until the day they turn 18, are part of parents. And so they have a right to use force to train their children. But Doctrine and Covenants 121 says they must do it lovingly. If they do it mean, then amen to the priesthood of that man or the authority of the woman. So how beautiful are God's principles on the use of force. Free agency does not appear in the scripture. God does not use the term free with agency. It's just simply agency. Now, in mortal life, we do it to distinguish between real estate agencies, government agencies, business agencies. So it's all right to say free agency in that meaning, but not that it's free. You pay the price. President McKay said it's a measuring rod to judge the actions of all men, organizations, and nations. Anything people do, the use of violation of agency is prevalent all over the world. And it is our duty to defend it in any way that it falls within our sphere of influence. All right, what is agency? And it's the right of choice, but you can't make choice unless there's law. If there's no law, there can be no punishment, there can be no violation. So there must be law. Second, there are opposites, good and evil. Satan and Christ, truth and error, whatever it is, everything has its opposite in principle. Then knowledge. We must know the difference between good and evil to exercise our agent properly. The scriptures say someplace that people are in bondage because they lack knowledge. And another scripture says that darkness covers the earth and gross darkness the minds of the people. That's in Isaiah, you say. It's also in the Doctrine and Covenants. It applies today. Today, gross darkness covers the minds of most people as far as principles of right and wrong are concerned. The principle we're talking about here. Now, there are many brilliant people in this world, good people, highly educated, people who serve well and do many good things. But unless people have the knowledge, they are ignorant of the law. And as you know, in criminal actions, ignorance of the law is no excuse. You go before him, well, Judge, I didn't know what was the law. Well, you should have known because it's there. All right, and that leaves you with unfettered choice, and that is agency in its purest form. Now, force is from Satan. Back in the before they said to you, how will you accomplish? I'll force people. Well, that would be criminal. If you force people, well, I will do it by government, and then it will be legal. And that was presented to us before we ever came here. Unwise legislation undermines free agency, robs us of liberty, and makes us but a cog in the soul-destroying land of socialism. David O. McKay. If God gives to government the right to force people in criminal action, government has to have police. You know, the definition of government is power. Without power. George Orwell said, government is power, and like fire is a dangerous servant and a criminal master. Government must be handled carefully. It should protect life, liberty, and property. It should not provide, and we've been through that before. All right, let's come to education. What are the purposes of education? One is personal development, first of character. First thing parents want their children to know is right and wrong, develop of honesty and strength and courage and character. It thereby makes better families, good homes. It makes better workers. People go to work, the employers can trust them. They don't steal from them. They don't loaf on the job. They do the best they can. In a like manner, employers are considerate of their employees. You didn't have enough sleep last night, I'm ahead of time. Well, take a little rest and come back and work. How many employers do? Many do. Many employers do. But employers should apply the golden rule to their employees. The results desired: first, character, reduced delinquency, crime, waste, dishonesty, idleness, strife, war. All of these things come from lack of education or the application of true education. Increased affluence, that's good influence and a good society, a good culture, better religion, arts, sciences, and health, peace, and civilization. The value of education, good education, is personal benefits financially. Now, back in 1950 or 60, when I wrote this, the average high school employee or graduate made $2,000 a year more than one who dropped out. The average in a lifetime, that would amount to $200,000. So education is a financial benefit to have it. Intellectual development of knowledge, the pure joy of learning things. You learn things, oh, isn't that wonderful? I didn't know that. The joy of learning these things. To think that it's infinite. Man knows little. Thomas Edison, considered one of the most knowledgeable men on the earth, said not one of us knows more than 1/100th of 1% of all knowledge. So we have a lot to learn. Usefulness and talents and the spiritual benefit of it, and the community benefits that come from good education, better goods and services. It benefits religion, art, and culture. Education started almost the day the Pilgrims and others landed on the coast of America. One of the reasons many of them fled Europe is because the king or the government controlled their education and their religion. And many of them came here for that purpose. And so as soon as they landed, they started educating their children, or continued doing the best they could. But now they're free to educate them. They didn't think of sending them off to school. They just taught them what they wanted to know. And then they got to the point where, well, I don't know much about this, that, or the other thing. Somebody does. If he'll come and teach my children, I'll pay him a little bit. So we developed circuit teachers. Oliver Cowdery was a circuit teacher. He would come into a town and he would board with somebody as part of his pay, and he would teach their children. He'd move on to another family, and that way. And this way, he wound up in Joseph Smith's home. And he became the writer of the translation of the Book of Mormon. A very well-educated man, brilliant. He went on to become one of the finest lawyers in America after he left the church. He was very well educated. Church schools, people realized that this circuit thing was not good enough. You couldn't get enough of them. So the churches began having schools, and people would send their church. Now, in the early colonies, most colonies were settled by one religion. The Presbyterians in, I think, New Hampshire and so forth. And so they had no problem. But in countries, and later in this country, where many religions are mixed up in the same school, well, it just becomes a pot pie of mixture, and it doesn't work very well. And so people develop private schools. They thought, well, if we hire Oliver Cowdery and provide him school facilities here, why, we can send our children in there and have schools. So private schools developed, and they grew and flourished. They became grade schools, high schools, universities. The first universities in America were private schools. Harvard was a private school, the first university in America, until the government began giving it aid and took it over. The church has always emphasized the need for education. It's in the scriptures, it's in the teaching of the prophets. On the way from Nauvoo to Salt Lake, they were teaching their children as best they could in the wagons. And among the first things they did when they landed was to organize school. And at first we had church schools in Utah, and the church continued church schools until other schools took them over. And since the church is not in the education business, they divested themselves of all the schools except BYU, Idaho, and in some areas where there aren't schools, the church continues to provide it. And then they provide seminary for religious instruction. So that the Lord works perfectly in harmony with the education needs of the day. A fervid but false solicitude, a kindness for the unfortunate, is behind much of the push for our public education. Oh, your poor children need it. Oh, you don't have good schools. We need public education. The first public schools, we call them the Little Red Schoolhouse, and we didn't realize that they were red because the communists infiltrated them very early, because one of the planks in the Communist Manifesto for destroying the United States was a free, compulsory education system. Government schools. And so they were right in influencing with their philosophies at first, so that instead of reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and so forth, they're learning all these philosophies. So as a result, we send our children into the Little Red Schoolhouse, and they come out, increase in crime, delinquency, hippies, rock music, uninformed citizens, irresponsible parents, disrespectful children, socialist planners, communist programs, and venal politicians. Now that means not everybody's bad, but many people come out this way, and many of them are zealous in doing good, and they use that influence. And so I've told you before, 40 years ago, or whenever I started these courses, I came to education, I said, if you take the finest group of people in the world, the most honest, cultured, educated, and so forth, and create a public school among them and force their children to go into that school, at first it will appear to flourish. First, Satan's plan just looks so good. When you rob the bank, that looks so good. Almost every wrongdoing has an enticement up front that makes it seem good. And so at first we had wonderful schools. I benefited immensely from being forced to go to a public school, and probably many of you did. And so, fine. But then the principle of entropy comes into gear. I didn't know what that meant. My son-in-law, Kerry Adams, sent it to me. Well, I don't know, what does that word mean? He said, it's a scientific principle that anything wrong, any scientific wrong, anything wrong has built-in destruction. And gradually it goes down and down and down. It may waver a little with a little reform here and there, but there's nothing that can stop it from destruction except complete reform, removing it. And so it applies to education just as it applies to any of the sciences. The very principle of entropy verifies what I said 40 years ago, that this public education system, after the first flourish, would begin to descend to complete destruction if it's not stopped at some point. If the government doesn't come in and take control, if dictators don't dictate it, it would go to absolute confusion. People would be fighting themselves over religious education. They'd taking the children out of school. It would self-destruct. So that principle verifies what I recognized 40 years ago without knowing the entropy principle behind it. John Dewey was one of the most influential educators in America for many, many years. Columbia's Teachers College was established as the great Teachers College of the United States. Anybody that graduated from there was pretty well assured of a good job as a school administrator or teacher. And 40% of the heads of teachers' colleges in our country attended John Dewey's classes. 20% of school superintendents, many administrators and principals. He has had tremendous influence over the educational curriculum and procedures of our country. Now, he was not alone. He was one of a group of what they call the frontier thinkers. They call themselves promoters of progressive education instead of this same old reading, write, arithmetic, and all that. Why, we're going into philosophies, we're going into many other things. And so if you do that, you know you're going to neglect reading, writing, arithmetic. The frontier thinkers included many people, and I'll come to that a little later. And then came the NEA, the National Education Association, is the police force of the teachers. By offering them many benefits, insurance, and many things, and defend them if they have a problem, they win all the teachers. To get to the point, if you're not a member of NEA, well, you're out of step. You're not in the school system. So, but once you are a member, then you do what it says. When it has a policy, you follow it. When it has programs to force on the schools, you support them. So the NEA is one of the most evil organizations in our country today. It not only does not want to destroy the schools, it wants to control them for political purposes which are contrary to everything that we stand for in our country. And it is a very vicious, very busy people. I have read their materials much, and it is sickening to read what they say about our public schools and the force and control they'll exert over them. They have tremendous influence with our legislatures. What did John Dewey teach? What did he believe? John Dewey was an atheist. He did not believe in God. He believed that the teaching of God should be banished from schools. Now, he did this a little subtly. He didn't just come out and say to Harvey Taylor. How many of you knew Harvey Taylor? Superintendent of Mesa Schools for many years. Fine man, wonderful, personable. Oh, he could win anybody. Great speaker. Good, honest, sincere man. I took my first high school year when he was head of Mesa Schools. Years later, I served with him on the High Council. I was very closely associated with that man. I admired him. I was his home teacher for 3 years. All right. After 20-some years of controlling education in Mesa, he was called to a position in BYU. 2 years later, he came back and spoke at the beginning of school, when they gather all the school administrators and people together for their beginning meeting. He said, "I have come to make a confession. I no longer believe in the teachings of John Dewey." He came back wiser than he went up. To think that all these years he had been pushing something that was wrong. Sincere, very capable, wonderful man. Now, I don't want to detract a thing from that man. I loved him. He was a marvelous man. I've been in his home many times. I've been to many of his talks and so forth. I admire him, and I know that making his repentance, confession as much as he can, he will rise above it to the wonderful atonement of our Savior. I expect he will be in the highest kingdom, and I'm happy that he will. All right. They taught that man was a biological animal. He was not created. He developed by evolution. They said that environmentalism is the cause of our actions. We respond to whatever the climate or everything is. We're not guided by intelligence. We're guided by things that happen to us. Pragmatism, no fixed truth or morals. And we come to that a little more when we get to Einstein. Social adjustments. Education should be a matter of adjusting people socially. They come out of all different kinds of families, religion, and everything. It's to help them be adjusted equally so they think and act alike. You remember hearing that in the pre-existent world? I will make everybody think and act the way I tell them to think. All right. They de-emphasize all the regular education, and so we have a great deterioration in all these fields that we think we're sending our children to school to learn. It was a case of learn by doing. If you want to learn about something, mathematics or something, why build a sandbox and say how many buckets of sand does it fill the buckets, and you take out 3 buckets, how many buckets more? Everything. They waste their time doing many projects, many field trips. All these wonderful field trips. They have no business in schools. They don't do anything. Well, they may teach something, but not much. There's a waste of time and money. And so many of the programs in our school are coming from the teachings of John Dewey and the frontier thinkers. No grading. No, don't grade people. Don't make this person look brighter than this one and this one. Well, I'm no good. I can't learn anything. Just don't grade them. Just teach them and let them be. And then group thinking. Ask the students, how do you think it should be? It's not said. It could be changed. What you want. And so they get the children involved in many things except reading, writing, arithmetic, and character building. All right, masters of deceit. Where do we find that term, masters of deceit? The first master of deceit was up in heaven, Satan. Since he does not have truth, he must have the nearest imitation of truth that he can find. And so, if God did not create anybody, then it's just called. Well, if there's no creation, where did man come from? You can't create something out of nothing. Joseph Smith said that it is impossible to create something out of nothing. If there's nothing there, you just can't do anything with it. All right. So they invented the Big Bang. You heard of the Big Bang? So, well, out of nothing, there's suddenly a Big Bang like that, which caused the beginning of evolution. Because once there's a Big Bang, and the evolutionaries argue among themselves. Rather, many of them, they argue, no, he's wrong, it's this way, it's that way. They're not all settled on one thing. They don't know what they're talking about, but they know that they must force it on people. Everybody thinks Charles Darwin is the author of evolution. You ever heard of Charles Darwin? You ever heard of Charles Lyell? Charles Lyell wrote the theory of evolution. He published it and said, my object is to destroy Christianity. He's in England, and he was attacked so violently, criticized so violently that he lost his influence, he withdrew. So he became with Charles acquainted with Charles Darwin, who had been some tinkering along this line and done some writing on it. Oh, Charles, here is what you've been looking for. And I will promote you from behind. Reputation shattered, but I'll do everything I can to promote you as the greatest authority on evolution in the world. And he traveled all over the world teaching his theory of, Lyell's theory of evolution before schools, legislators, people, groups, every place. Evolution has been accepted by our educational system as a truth. In the schools, it is illegal to teach creationism. It is compulsory to teach evolution. Now, many people have tried to get it modified. So the legislature tried to make it optional to teach it, or to teach it as a theory, not as a truth. So far, they haven't been able to get that across. The pushers of evolution are so strong because it's a first plank in their program, destroying education. Then we come to Karl Marx and his dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism is a process of two steps forward, one step back, two steps forward, one step back. Gradually put your program into effect where people don't, you start, oh, we don't want that. Okay, we'll quit. Back up a step, come out under a new name or a new way or something, prove that. Well, we don't like that. Oh, we'll take it away. Back up, come back again a new way, and gradually overcome the objections that people pose. He was an atheist. He said, my object is to dethrone God. He said man was a material being, and he was a promoter of communism, socialism. He was a great beginner of it. Lenin, who followed him, was a great composer. He developed the meaning, the education of it, but Karl Marx developed the theory of it. And communism and socialism are as alike as two peas in a pod. J. Reuben Clark. Communism is by force. We'll smash them down, we'll beat the government, kill them. Socialism is by penetration. But both have the same object, to destroy God. Then Sigmund Freud, psychoanalysis. And by the way, socialism has been accepted in our country. This is a socialist nation. What is socialism? Government ownership and control of private property. We've talked before about the extent to which you control your private property. Only under regulations, permission of the government. You do not have freedom of your property. You have permission to use it to a certain extent. All right, psychoanalysis, atheism. Freud was an atheist. He said the scriptures are mythology. Don't pay any attention, don't believe them. Satan is a myth. There is no sin. There is no right and wrong. Any action is right or wrong by whatever effect it has. It might seem wrong to him, and it might seem right to her. Well, it is right to her. Now, this is applied very much in sex violation. They say, well, some people prefer to have sex before marriage and so forth, but that's their right. They can do that. But some people know that it's a natural impulse of the human body, and it should be satisfied when it felt. And so that was his teaching. There's no moral values. There's no guilt. Again, guilt is just whether it affects you for good or bad, and it might be guilt for one person and not for another. Sex is the basis of behavior. He believed that the sex drive is what controlled everything else we did. We lived to have sex. We were born to have sex to perpetuate the race. So all of our actions, we earn money, we have food, we sleep, we do everything to be able to fulfill our supreme duty of satisfying that supreme sexual urgency that God has placed in every person, every normal person, to ensure the perpetuation of the human race. But it's to be exercised only under his strict moral commandments. And since there's no moral, why, it doesn't matter who you do it with, how many times you do it. And so, again, 40 years ago, the best society will come, and it'll come down to where have immorality, crime, delinquency, sex. And don't we have that in our school today? All right. Psychiatry should replace religion. There's no use for religion. Religion is a thing of teaching a God that doesn't exist and right and wrong that don't exist. So psychiatry should control our lives. Now, has the United States accepted psychiatry? Is the picture of a man on a couch talking to a psychiatrist common? I see it in the papers all the time. It has been accepted. It may not be believed by everybody or believed to some extent, but it has replaced religion in his thing. Now you come to the one that make people get up and walk out of my class. I attended a priesthood lesson once where the instructor, who departed entirely from what the lesson was all about, put on the board Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was the most learned man on the earth, and it is the basis behind the gospel of Jesus Christ. I heard that in a priesthood meeting. Now, that's the extent. Now, such people are few and far between, but they represent what the world, as a general thing, believes. And so, Albert Einstein was an atheist. He was a communist. Well, people say, oh, Albert Einstein said, well, God did this and that. He quoted God just like other people do, but he did not actually believe that God existed and is our creator. There are no moral laws. He said, there's no right and wrong. Everything is just, again, part of Sigmund Freud's philosophy, that everything depends only on the result, the effect. There's no moral value. Situation ethics. Whatever situation you're in determines what you can do. If you want to do it, do it. If you feel you shouldn't, if you don't think you ought to go to the bar tonight and drink, don't go. But if you feel that you should, go on. Just do whatever the situation calls for. Know absolute truth that everything is relative. All right. Most people don't believe that. Some become angry. Oh, he's one of the most brilliant men in the world. He was one of the 5 most brilliant men in the world. 5 most brilliant men in the world. The Lord's gospel is so simple. His plan of government is so simple that a common person can understand it, sufficient to benefit and live by it. All of God's programs are very simple. Now, they're very profound so that you never get the depth of them, but the operation and explanation is simplicity itself. And so, the first time I heard this in my social studies class in Mesa High School, Holland Melvin was a teacher, and he made that statement that he was one of the most brilliant men, 5 most brilliant men in the world. Very few people could understand the philosophy of Einstein. He was just too brilliant. Now, that isn't true. The Lord's got the gospel and any truth that we need. Simple enough that you and I understand it, teach it our children. A convert to the church in Chile could understand that enough to benefit from it. So when I heard that from Holland Melvin, I said, that can't be true. I don't know more than my teacher, but I know that can't be true. The Spirit was witnessing to me that it was not true. We're going to fix this thing. Everybody admits that the public education system is in a wreckage. So we're going to fix it. Now, the people who are going to fix it are the people who had it in mind when they built it. Now they're ready to come along. We do it, and when we get to that point, we'll use our plan. Federal control of education. I have a number of books, of many that I have. I had to select what I thought would represent each phase of education. First, I have those who know what they're doing and are promoting for evil purposes. Second is those who know that these principles are wrong and that they're being promoted by government, and they need to be reformed by taking government out of education. But they don't realize that you can't fix something that's unfixable. You cannot convert Satan. And so if the system is bad, nothing you can do will make it good. You can patch it, you can fix it, and so forth. But public education was doomed from the day it started by entropy to eventual destruction. And so as a result, we have more problems than you could count due to public education. The next one is a group of persons, and I have many, many books of people who analyze the public education system and tell you what's wrong with it. None of them realize that you have to abolish it. Every one of them has purposes, reasons, programs for reforming it. And so those books, while they're worth reading, and I could pile them that high, show that many people in the United States realize that the education system is broken, but they don't realize that it's not fixable. Their whole program is sincere and zealous effort to fix that can't be fixed. And so they make every sort of mistake that can be made. They try everything to be tried and invent some more that can't be. And so our public schools today are experimented by everybody from parents to legislators and school people. There are more programs for reforming the schools than you can count, and I brought a few examples, some of them here. And then a very few of them come to the point that it's not fixable, abolish it. One of them is Ezra Taft Benson. Now, Ezra Taft Benson made many speeches about improving school and doing that. Basically said, because you can't abolish it immediately, make it the best you can, but the only answer is to abolish it. Get rid of it. The other is by Verlin Anderson, who used to live in Mesa. The Anders family is well known here. He became a general authority at 70. Now, he had written this book, The Great and Abominable Church of the Devil, before he was called an authority. When he was called an authority, he pulled it out because he didn't want to mix it up with his church authority. But later on, I think he had permission, and so he brought it out again for distribution. But in this, he makes it very clear that the great and abominable church of the world, Babylon the Great, the United Nation, and the compulsory education system that promotes it all is an evil abomination. So you have those two books, and then you have a book by Samuel L. Blumenfeld. This man started out to reform public education, and he ran into one problem after another. He began to study it very deeply. He studied it, and he came to the conclusion that it's not only unnecessary, but it's harmful, and it should be abolished. So for every one of these people who are trying to reform it, we have very few who realize that the only answer is to wipe it out. Get rid of it. People say, oh, what will we do with our children? Well, I can come to that later. But ask yourself, if there were no public schools, what would we do? When there were no public schools, what did the church do? When no public schools, what did the colonists do? They were better educated than our college graduates of today. Now, I see a college graduate back there smiling. But she's an exception. She hasn't known about if she's done it. She's getting it tonight. And I think I told before that one or two of my classes teachers taking it, they just got up and walked out angry, never came back. That's how committed they were to it. So we have a tremendous uphill battle, a great war, but it will be done. If not, it will collapse and be taken over complete dictatorship by the government, by the United Nations. That's a book I told you before. The man who wrote this book is traveling all over the country, speaking to groups, anybody listen to, legislators, anybody. He goes from one state to another. He's been doing this for several years. Then he ran into the problem of UN taking over schools, studied that, and came out with this book, which I showed you last time, Battleground for Freedom, that the United Nations is taking over our schools, and doing so they're destroying all the principles of the Constitution that we have and religion. So, and yet his solution is to get the government out of it. Don't abolish it. And so Minnesota is the leading state in this. Mississippi does a lot of it, but Minnesota legislature, after this man had taught around the state, they elected a governor and legislature whose first act was to stop the government education, to quit taking their money and not put them in effect. But their object was to reform it. And they've made some of the best public schools in the world in Minnesota. But they are under the principle of entropy, where they themselves will automatically deteriorate. Here's a book, Morality in Education, a talk in General Conference. It's a compilation of 3 outstanding talks at the 138th semi-annual conference for the church. Alvin R. Dyer spoke of the new morality. Alvin R. Dyer was a very much aware man. I was at conference one day walking down the street, and a man came and said, "President Dyer wants to see you in his office between sessions. Hurry up there." President Dyer doesn't know me. Well, President Dyer has an important message for everybody, and he wants a responsible representative from every place that I can get, and I know you are. So I went up there, looked at the library. His library is filled with John Birch Society books and many of the books that I knew. And he said that this new morality is going to destroy our children. Sex education at school. Go back and get with your school boards and stop it. Don't leave it to the women, because the school boards say women are emotional. The men have the power. Well, I attended a number of school board meetings and tried to make my speech, and so get no place. And my brother-in-law, who was an administrator in the public school, he said, "Louis, you're wasting your time. These schools are surrounded by a big foam buffet. You can punch it in and this and that, but you will never get through to them." Well, I went as long as I could, and so I quit on that one. I'll attack it from another way. Another was the law of chastity. Mark Peterson, that the law of chastity is being downgraded, taught wrong in our schools, that if it feels good, do it, that it's a natural urge if the situation is right. So what's going to happen to our children when they're taught that? To the humble followers of Christ, Ezra Taft Benson, a speech that he reprinted. I distributed many copies of it. I won't go through much of this. It's just that he's saying that we are being taught the wrong things in our schools. We have been told we're not listening, or we don't understand the significance of it. But I'm told. Now, We have those who become very angry if you talk about schools. I talked about teachers left. We have one of our Mesa school teachers for many years, one of the leading school teachers, most active. He appeared in public meetings and so forth. He was the one who got those pillars erected down school when the school, Lincoln School, took down. He had those pillars erected as a monument to public education. And he was very angry. He said, why the dishonest attacks on the schools? The dishonesty is in aiming to make Americans believe there is something drastically wrong with our schools. In this way, Americans and their money can be stampeded into supporting private schools by a so-called voucher system or other public funds. If Americans allow themselves to be duped by this dishonesty, they will deserve to lose their public schools they have provided, and that would be wonderful. A report card for American education will make all true Americans proud. It should be published on the front page of every newspaper, displayed in the halls of Congress, enshrined in the hearts of all honest people. And then he tells her all the wonderful schools, things that public education has done. So we have those on one end who know that it's evil and want it abolished. We have the huge number in between who know that it's bad but needs to be reformed. And then we have those who will fight any effort to reform or abolish it. So we're in a great battle. Our legislators, our teachers, and college graduates being ignorant of the principle of the Constitution, I want to make it clear that these people are excellently trained. They have great knowledge. I admire them very much. Wish I had an education, and they do much good in the world. They just don't understand these basic principles. Catherine, graduate from BYU and has a degree from BYU. Have you learned anything about the Constitution here that you would not learn in school? Of course. It's just, I want to make it clear that I'm not degrading any of our wonderful people who are far superior to me in education and accomplishment. I admire them very much. So now, Brother Tanner reminds me that when I went to this Oh, thank you. Oh, I wanted the other one. The United Nations take over schools. Now, I wrote a letter to him and to our Senator, Karen Johnson, and to my representative, Russell Pierce, and complimented them on bringing him here and the wonderful job he did. But I said, he's spinning his wheels in a very slow way on a program that's moving too fast for him. He will never, by going from place to place, making these little talks, ever cover the United States before this move to take over our education takes effect. And I said, what you need is in every state to organize an education committee to study, investigate the public, to have a legislature appoint these people, bring them in. You can have school representatives on them, but do not have them in the majority and do not let them dominate it. But if you do this in every state quickly, if every legislature would do this, then we could have a program that would move forward rapidly. And then I pointed out that the real object should be to abolish public education, but I don't know if they'll accept that or not. At any rate, I haven't heard from any one of them, so I know they read it because two of them read it that night standing there, and the other one promised me that he would read it. So at least I have done my job. And that's one of the things that I hope you learn in this course. If you do what you're responsible to do, then you are clear. It's their responsibility. You have put the responsibility. If I do not tell them, then I bear the responsibility of not acting. So again, the inactivity of the masses of people is the one greatest cause of our trouble. And so I can't reach the whole United States by teaching 25 persons once in a while in a Constitution course, but for whatever influence you can have in fulfilling your responsibility, we've done all we can, and we say to the Lord, I did what I could. Otherwise, I stand before judgment. Well, no, I didn't do anything. Well, you knew. The general authorities told you many times in conferences and in publications. You knew. Well, I just didn't realize it. Well, you take the natural penalty for whatever you did. I didn't mention the Phyllis Schlaffer report. The Eagle Forum, and probably many of you are familiar with it, maybe belong to it, but I've taken her thing for years, and much of her work has been on what's happening to our college campuses, what's wrong with out-based education, what schools teach and don't teach, the politics of the NEA union. She analyzes very carefully NEA disrespect for home and parents. But the ultimate end is the schools should be reformed. She doesn't get the picture that you can't reform Satan. And because people don't know that Satan is in every school board meeting and every class and everything, why they have blinders on and they don't see these things. Right. There was a part of the last chart that I didn't finish. The people who instigated the public education system to accomplish their needs of destroying the nations and the homes and the families, remember? Right there with the program when you need it. All right, we need education reform. All right? What we need is to combine the schools and the businesses together in a profile of skills, basic skills, workforce preparation, economic development, management of the system, Goals 2000, and later the No Child Left Behind, a school to work program where children will leave school for an hour and go work for a plumber or a lawyer or a cabinet maker to get a picture work, and to compel children to choose their life's education as early as the second grade. And if they don't choose one, they assign them one, and then their education is to prepare them to take that job. If it takes a lot of arithmetic, they get it. If it doesn't take arithmetic, they don't get any. And so it's a terrible thing on our schools. I'm not going any further in it, but the School to Work program is to change the schools into training people for the jobs they will hold. Now, I have selected from my files and boxes and bundles clippings from the newspaper. Every day I read newspaper. There are always articles on the education system, problems, this or that, other thing. I've clipped them. So I've selected a few of them. The representative of it. To start with, just the error of false teaching. Don't believe all your teachers tell you. This is Thomas Monson speaking to the young people. Don't believe all your school teachers tell you. Don't believe all you read in the textbooks. They mix enough truth with error to deceive. Just as in poisoning animals, men mix poison with enough desirable food to attract and deceive animals. Brigham Young, free education. Many of you have heard what certain journalists have said about Brigham Young being opposed to free schools. I am opposed to free schools. I'm opposed to free education as much as I'm opposed to taking property away from one man and giving it to another. who knows not what he has to take care of. But when it comes to the fact, I will venture to say that I school children for every one that those who complain of me do. I now pay the school fees of many children who are either orphans or sons and daughters of poor people. But in aiding and blessing the poor, I do not believe in allowing my charities to go through the hands of a set of robbers who pocket 9/10 and give 1/10 to the poor. If you think of the tremendous amount of funds in education that never reach the schoolroom. In Arizona and almost every state, the percent of taxes collected by Arizona, almost 70% goes to education. Now, if we didn't have any public schools, what would the taxes be? Well, he goes on to say, therein is the difference between us. I am for the real set of doing, not saying. Would I encourage free public schools by taxation? No, that is not keeping the nature of our work. We should be as one family, our hearts and hands united in the bands of everlasting covenant, and our interests allied, our children receiving equal opportunities in our education. All right. I often take one day's education and put them, see what the problem of our day, and sometimes it's big, but I've put them in classifications. Here's where I justify my statement that the schools will eventually control over your health, your diet, your food, and so forth. All right? They start out because poor people come to school without breakfast. Therefore, the schools must furnish them breakfast. All right? Many of them are eating junk foods and not getting food, so we should provide noon meals. And so schools now have big cafeterias where they provide food. Now, are they going to determine what food the children eat? Of course they are, because food affects things. People have illnesses from the result of food. Here's an article. A bill would require staff training for allergies. School teachers must be trained to recognize allergies and to prescribe foods and medicines for them. Are they taking over your health? Where's the one I dropped? Pulling the kids out of classification. There's now a bill in the Arizona legislature to compel parents to pay for every day their child misses school. Why? Because the state allocates funds to each school on the basis of daily attendance. $5,000 per year per school, but if they don't attend, they don't get it. So the schools say they are costing us money, therefore the parents should pay what we lose when they stay out of school. And that bill is in our legislature today. I don't know how far it'll go, but it's there. Big moan on the campus. Mesa High School adjust to noontime, lunchtime confinement. Mesa High School, whether they still do, I don't know, but for a while they had a rule that you could not leave the campus at noon. You have a cafeteria, you can bring your lunch, and they're talking about the big moan, how many students complain about not being able to go across the street to their home for dinner or get out and buy something they need very badly. So Mesa High Schoolers adjust. You conform your life to it. All right. Religion. Schools exercise control of your religion. If they don't, they will. Here's one evolution trial. A judge offers a compromise. Some of the parents are complaining about their children being forced to learn evolution. So let them teach it a theory, and let them teach that creationism is a theory. Well, he said, we'll compromise it. We won't let them teach creationism, but we'll let them teach evolution as a theory. Great compromise, isn't it? Sex education replaces Yule rites in school. Instead of celebrating Christmas they used to, why, they're having sex education program. An article out of the paper. I didn't write it. Education controls our lives. Right? Tempe Elementary Board reconsiders calendar. They have met to decide whether to have all your schools, all-day schools, longer schools, so forth. Will the parents do what they decide? The parents who send their school will follow their schedule. So your life schedule is now controlled by the school schedule. We get up in the morning primarily to get our children to school on time. Our work schedules, we go on vacations when the school says we may have a vacation. Almost everything we do, even business schedules are often operated on school times and school days and school hours. Schools control our lives. Early education doesn't pay in the long run. Once in a while we get some reasonable thing in a newspaper. And this article in here says that a study of kindergarten education shows that they have a quick burst of learning for a year or two, but then it levels off and they don't learn any better than the other children. But the people who promote it, oh, that's good. We get them out of the influence of their parents 2 years earlier. And that's one of the purposes. You can get children out of the influence of their parents. In the books of those who promote our public education, we read, this is back in the 1920s, that the aim of schools should be to teach public citizenship, not nationalism, not loyalty to any country or constitution. We're all citizens of the world, and that is being taught in many ways in our school. Our textbooks are rewritten to conform to these teachings. But in this book it says, parents infect children with nationalism. Schools must correct parents' narrow teachings. Get babies into school, get mothers out to work where they do not have this bad influence upon their children. All right, this was the program that these people who created the UN schools, this is out of UNESCO, United Nations, and all the way through it talks about that we should get children away from the false teaching of parents, glorify the ugly, give TV children's programs an influence. I would not let a child watch children's program on television. They are being indoctrinated as well as entertained. I shudder when I see, well, they're a wonderful babysitter. You can sit them there and mother can go do her work for hours because they're absorbed by it. But I'm not telling you what to do except to beware of what you do with television. I wouldn't have a television in my house if it wasn't for General Conference and one or two things. Many good programs that if I had time I could watch, but I don't have time because the battle is so great it takes most of my time. So I can't do a lot of things that I could do if we did not have public education. Influence the comics. I had a comic strip here on evolution. It shows a little out of the ocean, and pretty soon it's a tadpole. Pretty soon it turns into a little snail or something, and it shows a picture clearly all the ways up to man, and then it says, proceed at your own risk. But much of our comics influenced by these teachings. Most of them I don't read. I have 2 or 3 that I like for entertainment. But be careful what your children read. That's another way. Well, give the children the comics and I can get ready for Sunday school and so forth. I never open a newspaper on Sunday. I don't want that junk in my head before I go to sacrament. Now, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you how I feel. All right. Anyway, this whole program for the United Nations taking over our education is based on getting them away from the false, indecent teachings of their parents. Break up the home. Think Satan has anything to do with that? East Valley full-day kindergarten sign-up kicks off early day. Start the early day with the children. Get them off to kindergarten. That was on the February the 13th of this year. The nation responsible for the age of technology is failing to provide its children with the intellectual tools they will need to enter the 21st century. Mathematics is not being taught. Many people who work use these computer systems and things. They use them, but they do not know what they mean. They just take the results. Well, I see the time is up. Class dismissed.